Hello and welcome to the Edify Podcast. This is designed for you, preacher, teacher, shepherd, deacon of the kingdom of God, for your edification, for your uplifting, for your ministry. Dear Edify, I hope this finds you well. Today marks the 20th anniversary of my arrival here as pulpit minister of this particular church. I'll never forget how eager I was to serve as a preacher and how happy my young family was to transition from preaching school to a small rural church like the one I continue to serve today. I pray that I've served this congregation well these past 2 decades, that I have preached God's words faithfully, that I have loved them fully, but I must admit something. I'm surprised that I'm still here. On the day that the congregation hired me, there were 80 people on the membership roll. Today there's 92. That's not much difference. Sure, there have been several people who have placed membership over the years, and there have been a few conversions too. But there have also been some who haven't remained with us. The small town our church serves is a macrocosm of the church that we are. Population in the entire county was 12,000 when I first began, and today it sits at 9,800. There's not much happening here, and our young people always seem to leave for the city and the opportunities it offers for careers and, as much as I hate to say it, more prominent churches and preachers. Honestly, and I hope this doesn't sound prideful, I always thought I would serve a larger congregation in a more highly populated and more significant place. It seems nowadays, too, that a preacher has to build his platform through social media. But I haven't really done that because nobody is going to read the musings of a preacher serving in such an obscure place. Same with books. I have ideas, but who would ever read me? When you have so many other good options by preachers who preach before hundreds and sometimes thousands each week or a few times a year. Now that I've reached middle age, I sometimes wonder what might have been. Have you ever felt this way? Should I think about making a change at this juncture? Maybe look for a new position in a larger place? Or is there genuine merit in doing the same thing week in and week out for the same people for a lifetime? As you can probably tell, I'm beyond discouraged and am being tempted by anxious thoughts about what I've accomplished for the Lord. Thank you very much and would appreciate your thoughts on this matter. Obscure preacher. Well, obscure preacher. Your question, as I understand it, how can we be filled with joyful contentment in pulpit ministry when our setting is one of, what's the $3 word? Anonymity, and obscurity. So that's a great question, and it's important because it addresses a tension that most of us are going to face. On the one hand, I suppose that we all, at least occasionally, wonder what it would be like to be all widely well known in all of the ministry circles and all over the United States, around the world, or whatever. Fame itself is not a bad thing. I have a number of spiritual heroes who are, biblically sound, but they're also, well known in the brotherhood. God has used, let me use a more modern word, their platform, tongue in cheek, to work wonderful blessings in people's life, mine included. They're great writers, they're great preachers, they're great teachers, they're all the above, and they're being used by God, and we're thankful for those folks. And that has to be a thrill, but it also has to be exhausting at the same time. Think about the demanding pressures that it would have been. So these are just my initial thoughts. We think about, quote, being famous or well-known or whatever that may be. That does have an inward focus more than it does on a Godward focus, just in general. But here's the reality. Most of us who stand in pulpit ministry will ever be famous to the world, but we are famous enough to God. Many of us who labor our whole lives in settings where no one outside of the particular church where we are will ever know our names. And so let's ask this question: is contentment even possible for this obscured preacher who feels like that he's a nobody and hasn't done much, and he's not had a successful, quote, career or ministry, or he feels like that he would have been somewhere else, but he's not. So if you're wondering if it's possible to be content in such an environment, the word is yes. If your contentment depended on being widely known, then contentment would certainly be an impossibility. So the good news is that true contentment does not depend on the breadth of our particular ministry, how wide our paint strokes are, if you will. God sovereignly, God graciously places us in current work, pulpit ministry, and you and I are witnesses of things, problems plaguing the church in America, the closing down of factories or the opening of factories, negative population shifts, school closings, business closings, COVID, this, that, and the other, fill in the blank. But we have to admit this reality. We are unable to protect the church from being affected by those particular changes. I preached at Collierville when I was in preaching school in Memphis, and it was a very transient area. FedEx is the home there in Memphis, and there were a whole lot of folks who lived in Collierville, right outside of Memphis or Germantown or places like that, and they drive into Memphis to work. Well, that type of work is really transient work. They're folks who are going to be there for 3 to 5 years, and then they're moving on to another place in FedEx. That's just the nature of the beast. So there's nothing you can do about that. And so that's just the way it is sometimes. But I'm certain that very few of us, well, let me put it this way. I'm very certain that few people are going to know our names outside of our churches, and that's just the way that it is. And it's probably a blessing for us. God has been faithful, and God will always be faithful through all of your work. He will sustain you through every bit of this, and He will give you a deepening sense of contentment if you put your eyes and your heart on the things that will bring those things. So yes, it is possible to be deeply joyful and content, even when there's nobody outside of the local church who will ever know your name. Well, the question is how, though? Because it may not be a pride thing. It may be I just want to be a blessing to God's people. I want to be used by God. I want there to be many people. I want to baptize thousands of people. And so sometimes that's just not a reality. It's just not the way that we'd like for it to be. But is there contentment? Well, yeah, but let's talk about how. It may be that the heart of our question, and the obscure preacher here may be, being known. And I think that shows us the way forward. It's been my experience that we can absolutely overflow with joyful contentment in every single circumstance. Paul did, and Paul was in a jail cell. Paul was without. Paul was beat. Paul was this. Paul was that. Paul did a whole lot of enduring and not a whole lot of complaining, because he was known by God and he knew God. And so that's where I want to take our minds there. I want to focus on some things that are three particular. The word is superior joys. Number one is the joy of knowing and being known by God. This is the first and the absolute most important key to contentment, is to focus on the irreplaceable joy found in knowing God and being known by Him. So in knowing Him, we're going to find a joy that no amount of fame or money, etc., could ever afford. And no degree of obscurity, no matter where the church building is located, no matter the church size, no matter the fruit that comes from it, none of those things. So there's a passage that I love, Jeremiah 17, and it's verses 5 through 8, and this is an encouragement to me, and I would give it to you. Thus says the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his strength, whose heart turns away from the Lord. He is like a shrub in the desert, and shall not see any good come. He shall dwell in the parched places of the wilderness, in an uninhabited salt land. Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. He is like a tree planted by water, that sends out its roots by the stream, and does not fear when heat comes. For its leaves remain green, and is not anxious in the year of drought, for it does not cease to bear fruit. So Jeremiah's warning here in 17, 5 through 6, speaks directly to this brother's issue, this preacher's issue, and if you're listening to this, your issue, or my issue. So when we look for the approval of man, and when we seek that approval by our own mechanisms, aren't we guilty of trusting in man? I think so. Aren't we guilty of having our hearts that are turning away from the Lord? I think so. So what does that tell us? Well, we're getting the result of the misguided aim. We're not content, but we're spiritual barren, okay? And we're going to become like shrubs in the desert. We're not going to see any of the good that we desire to come to pass if we pursue contentment by means of man's applause. Then we will certainly, both emotionally and spiritually, live in the desert, in the parched places of the wilderness, in an uninhabited salt land. We're going to be destined to experience the exact opposite of what it is that we're seeking. But what a magnificent promise that this prophet lays out for us in the next few verses. If we turn from trust in man, we put our trust in the Lord. If our focus is not being known by man, but on knowing God and being known by Him, look at these results. There's a spiritual vitality and fruitfulness that is certain to afford us contentment, regardless of our situation, regardless of the desert, regardless of this or that and the other. So I would encourage you to memorize this particular psalm, this word from Jeremiah, and also, passages like it. Psalm 1, that's an easy one. Okay, they're going to send rivers of contentment that are producing power flooding into your heart. I have found that to the degree that if I immerse myself daily in the pursuit of joy in God and by grace, am able to know and to enjoy and to experience that, I discover that desire for the praise of man is driven from my consciousness, not from God. So let me encourage you and everybody else and myself to place the highest possible priority on knowing and enjoying God. Use all of God's means of grace to the fullest extent possible in your fight for joy in God. So there is real freedom in this particular grace of knowing and being known by God. So when we spend ample time in communion with Him, through word, through prayer, He fills us to overflow with this particular joy. This sets us free to focus, all of our efforts on serving other people. And don't forget the words of Jesus here. Even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give His life a ransom for many. Wanting to be noticed by others and wanting others to make much of us and meet our needs is a prescription for pulpit frustration, okay? For spiritual frustration. And unfortunately, you heard it and I've heard it all. We've all heard voices from preachers who desire to move on to another church because their, quote, current church doesn't sufficiently appreciate them, or they don't do enough for them. But if your joy is based on how much others are taking notice of you and meeting your needs, then you're going to be frustrated more often than not. So lack of contentment can absolutely kill our effectiveness in ministry. And we have to bask in the idea and the joy of being known by God, not only knowing Him and having Him be our trust and our focus and our desire, but also being known by Him. God has often used His words to assure me and you that He knows me and that He takes notice of me and my ministry and yours. Colossians 3:22 through 24, Paul speaking to bondservants about about what should and should not motivate people in their work. He says, bondservants, obey the Lord in everything. Obey in everything those who are your earthly masters. He would say, don't waver in eye service, people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart. You're fearing the Lord. So whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. And he closes that thought with saying, you are serving the Lord Christ. Me and you who are privileged to be in ministry are also bondservants for the Lord. We should work heartily as for the Lord, not for men. We know that the Lord is watching our work, and that nothing we do in service goes unnoticed by Him. So how can I be full of contentment even when nobody outside of the local church will ever know my name? One big reason is that the Lord knows me. I can easily handle the fact that no one outside my church, quote, knows my name as long as that I know that He does. So, number 2, the joy of making God known. Another key for contentment in quiet, out of the way ministry settings, is the joy of making God known in a place where He has particularly planted us, if I could borrow that term. There is great joy to be found in abandoning the tireless effort to be known and in favor of the far more, the far world. If we will make our aim, this fulfilling aim to make God known, there's contentment there. And the second one, making God known flows from the first. As we search the Scriptures daily, seeking to know God better and praying that He will, quote, make known to us the riches of His glory, Romans 9:23. God graciously shows us more and more of His beauty, and this beauty fills our hearts, and so that we find great contentment, and great contentment producing joy in sharing with others what God has shown us, about Himself and about the great salvation that we have. So often our sense of contentment is threatened when God, in His good and wise providence, calls us to endure, quote, a lean season, despite our best efforts to proclaim. Sometimes it's not good for you to get the results that you want because God knows your proud heart. So, one factor that can fuel discontentment during a drought season is our tendency to compare our situation and capabilities with those of other works and other pulpits and other ministries. There was a conversation had a few years ago. A gifted, faithful preacher from another part of a particular state, and he said that in the fast-growing area where he ministered, his church averaged about 25 visitors each Sunday, mostly believers looking for a church home. That's kind of like what it is at Piedmont Road, anywhere from 25 to 50. But even if a fraction of those visitors became members, this fella said that they were certain to have a, quote, fast-growing church on their hands. Obviously, not every situation fits that pattern, and we must not, envy situations or preachers who have this situation or who can capitalize on this situation. You can have visitors week in and week out like we do, but sometimes they're professional visitors. Sometimes you're at a healthy place, a healthy, local area. There's a whole lot of great churches around. There's people who don't place membership, but they just want to float around. So that just happens. Don't envy that necessarily. It comes with its problems too. You're being in a larger church. You've got challenges and faces that we face, that some of us face that those of us in smaller churches wished we would never have. So just as we should not torpedo our own contentment by comparing, geographic or demographic situations with those in other places, we should also avoid comparing our gifts and our temperamental tendencies. I've known, and I trust you have too, highly admired faithful men who were gifted to accomplish great things in the church in a remarkable short span of time. I'm often marveled at the gifts of such men. It seems like everything they touch just turns to gold, but also be painfully aware that we may not be one of those. We all can sense that. We all can if we're not careful. God has gifted us to devote ourselves to a ministry that demands patience and perseverance over the long haul. All of us, Romans 12:6, have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Of course, I know that context was miraculous, but the thought still applies. The principle still applies. Much contentment can be found, especially during difficult seasons, by simply allowing God to give us clear insight into the gift mixed, if you will, that He's granted to us, being awakened to what God is doing. And this isn't some sort of miraculous heebie-jeebie hocus pocus. This is just looking at things and being aware and being conscious of the situation. God has given all of us gifts to grace the local church, and we all should use those gifts as best as we can in the situations where He has sovereignly, providentially placed us in those things. So the next joy is the joy of knowing others. It's not just about making God known, but it is also the joy of knowing others. And this takes place in the smallest of churches and the largest of churches. It does not matter. This is one of those joys that God produces in the local church. The final key that God has used to sustain contentment in all of our obscure ministries is the joy of knowing other people. Great contentment results when we lay aside the ambition to be known and instead pursue the far more rewarding joy of knowing other people and really knowing and really loving and really caring for those other people, especially when those people we're privileged to preach alongside or shepherd if you're an elder. And these joys are multiplied when God would use us to devoting our labor to a particular people over a lifetime. There's a blessing, a very, very great blessing. I heard Eddie Gilpin one time give a lecture at Polishing the Pulpit on why we should stay as long as we can stay. The blessings of long-tenured ministry at one particular place. And it was a great lecture. There were so many good things and good points that I took from that when I was there. There is a depth and a love, if you will, a depth of love and of joy between the preacher and the people that only, quote, a long marriage can produce. How wonderful when in God's plan He gives us those years. God has differing plans for different preachers, there's no doubt about it. But it's best not to prematurely pass over the significance of God's sovereignty and His providence in placing us somewhere where we currently serve. Some of us can see the handwriting on the walls, okay? Some of us can't. Some of us, there is no handwriting on the wall. Some of us are just anxious or nervous. We've got to be ready to depart immediately for other fields of service if we see the handwriting on the wall, if there's some sort of spiritual burnout that's taking place that cannot be healed from, which that's another podcast for another day. But we also have to be content in Him and so full of love for the church that we're delighted to serve those particular people for our whole lifetime. Do you go into your work thinking, I'm going to retire here or I'm going to die here, in a good way? That this is where I'm going to spend the rest of my work. I feel like that all of us should. I think biblically we should have the longevity in mind, not just a short lily pad jump. I'll get this one, maybe get a bigger church, and this, and I've got career goals and all this. We're servants. We're not in a popularity contest. We're not using the church as stepping stones to get where we want. We should not do that. I think that's distasteful. I think it's gross when I hear preachers talk about their next work when they just got to another one. I've heard them say that sort of stuff before, and I just felt bad for the church because I felt like he's not fully devoted when he's thinking about somebody else. I think that's just how it is. If you're dating a girl, you're not going to say, well, the next girlfriend that I have, just go ahead and turn that other one loose because you're not devoted to her. I've been grateful that God has allowed me to stay where I am for X number of years and where I was before that, and I pray that God allows me to stay here for the rest of my time here. I pray that's what His will is, because I know that there are incomparable delights when God gives us such a love for people and God allows us to have that love for people and knowing those people and growing those people and growing alongside those people and what those people can do for you. That sort of wonderful blessing is something that church, that being known outside of your particular local church can't touch. All of us have great stories of people that we know, people whose children we watch be born into this world. We bring in the babies and we bury the old, and we walk with everybody this and that, and we labor alongside. All of those are great things, and all of us have great stories who can relate to the local church and loving people and the blessings that come from loving those people. So, for this fellow who's been there for 20 years, I'm sure there are a whole lot of blessings that you're enjoying that some people who are, quote, famous aren't enjoying. Because they're not allowed to stay someplace for a very long time. They're having to bounce around. Some are having to leave local work altogether and go on the road and spread their knowledge everywhere. They're so highly sought after that it's just the nature of who they are. I've been in local work since 2012, and this will be I would say August will be 10 years. And some of you have done 3 or 4 times as much. But it's something to think about, that you're able to stay somewhere for a long period of time and enjoy those fruits. What we find out is when we love God's people, our hearts are knitted together. We have so many shared experiences. We attend each other's stuff, our kids, our parents, grandparents, this, that, and the other. We've grieved together. We've rejoiced together. We've when we lose, we all lose. When we gain, we all gain. We're truly one-hearted people. We're one family. We're one in Christ. And so may all of these joys be yours. These 3 that we've talked about today, being known by God, that's the most superior joy. Being knowing and being known by God, and then the joy of making God known, and then the joy of knowing other people. All of those are blessings that come with long tenure. Shift your contentment from trusting in man and man's praise and man's strength, and just stay where you are. As long as you're content with those particular things, that would be the advice I'd give to myself, and that I would give to you. And so Nehemiah 8 and verse 10, the joy of the Lord will be your strength. And that word strength there is translated stronghold. That's the only time that it's not translated stronghold. I don't know why. The context doesn't even fit strength. It always fits stronghold. The happiness that you have in God. This is not God's joy for you. This is your joy in God. Just be happy in God. Be happy in God. Be content with God. And that will be your stronghold that will uphold you, your fortress of solitude. So just be happy about God. Be happy about what you have been witnessed. You've been able to witness in God's work through you all of those years. Just love the Lord, love His people, and heaven will be your home. And let that joy be your stronghold.